Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Cozy Christmas Podcast. My name is Art, and we're talking about A Christmas Carol today. Specifically, we are talking about Alastair Sim's version of A Christmas Carol, one of my favorite movie adaptations of the story. And I have a special guest with me today. He's the host of the Holly Jolly Xmasu podcast. It's a podcast that explores Japanese Christmas albums, and it's a great podcast. If you haven't listened to it or heard it, I'll make sure to link it in the show notes so you can find it. I have found some great classic Christmas jazz music that is just fantastic. Before we get to that, I did want to bring in a couple of quick updates. Really just one about our Christmas book club. We have just finished reading Mrs. Claus and the Santaland Sleighs by Liz Ireland. It looks like everyone has had a wonderful time reading that. I will be having an episode out probably later this week. It might be in the podcast or it might be YouTube only. I'm not 100% sure yet. So make sure you keep an eye out for that though. And I'll be recording our thoughts and impressions. I might have a couple of guests on to talk about it. I don't know yet. We'll see what I'm able to put together. But also this week, I believe, if I'm on top of things, which this year has been a challenge, let me tell you, the new voting for April and May's book will be out this week, so we can start voting on that. I do know that Skipping Christmas will be on the choice, and there will be 2 other books added as well to the voting. Skipping Christmas was the number 2 choice from last time, so that gets a chance to be reconsidered this time around. I really don't have a whole lot of other news right now, except to say that it seems like Christmas is so far away right now. And when I recorded this episode, I think it was actually back in February or late January, I was really feeling the post-Christmas blues. And I just had this random idea to, hey, I'm going to record an episode talking about my favorite Christmas Carol adaptation. And I put the word out, and Scott from Holly Jolly Xmasu reached out and said he'd love to come on. We're going to talk about it, and I don't really have a lot of organized thoughts about it. It's mostly going to be just 2 fans talking about the movie. I do have some questions we kind of go through, but we all know the adaptation by now. We know the story. I love this conversation. It filled me with Christmas spirit. So thank you, Scott, for coming on. One quick thing, if we're expecting the next installment of the Chimes, I'm going to take just a break from that this week and pick it up again next week. I had wanted to have the story done by now, but life being what it is, things really got away from me. But I wanted to get this episode out too. So basically what I'll be doing is rearranging my complete schedule. And this week we're going to talk about The Christmas Carol. Next week we'll pick it up again with the Chimes chapters 3. And the following week will be chapter 4. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And then after that, I have another author interview I'll be doing of a cozy mystery series, more Christmas literature to recommend to you coming up over the next few months. So with that, I will go ahead and we will ascend to the interview loft, cup of coffee in hand. I will be talking with Scott from Holly Jolly Xmasu about A Christmas Carol starring Alastair Sim. My guest today is Scott from the Holly Jolly Xmasu podcast, which is the podcast that's your destination for Japanese Christmas music. So Scott, welcome to the Cozy Christmas Podcast.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to finally have you on. I've been a big fan of your podcast. I really love the Japanese jazz Christmas music. I don't know, it just all really works for me. So
yeah, and I've some of the albums I found are just they're really fantastic. So I have a lot of fun sharing those and doing the research on them and just finding out more about these musicians who you really don't hear about over here.
Well, eventually we're going to start talking about A Christmas Carol, one of my favorite films, one of your favorite films, the 1951 version. But let's find out a little bit about you and your podcast. What was the inspiration behind it? How did you get started with it?
I've collected Christmas music for several decades. And I really got into it in the early 2000s when file sharing, first started to be a big thing. As I got to be a part of the Christmas sharing community, meeting the guys who were sharing out these albums and talking to them and
Mm-hmm.
learning more about all a lot of the more obscure Christmas music out there. Somebody mentioned an album that they had heard about in Japan called Drum Christmas Drum by Akira Ishikawa. And he
Mm-hmm.
was like a big jazz and funk and fusion artist throughout the 70s. It kind of turned into like a holy grail album. Every
Mm-hmm.
once in a while, you'd find a clip of a song or an entire song would show up online, but I never could find the full album. And I spent about 8 years trying to track it down. Well, over the course of this, I started finding all these other names that it sounded like they had really fantastic albums, but you couldn't even find clips of them online. So after trying to get this thing for nearly a decade and realizing that there just wasn't a real viable way to do that without ordering the albums from Japan, towards the end of 2019, a few things happened. The first one was for Record Store Day that year, the an old compilation from the King Records label out of Cincinnati was re-released. It was an album that I really wanted to get, so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
we've got this record player downstairs. We're not using it. I may as well go ahead and get this album, break out the record player, and get to listen to these songs. Once we had the record player out and we were playing records again, once Christmas was done, I had a little Christmas money left over. So I told my wife, I was like, well, why don't I go ahead? I'll order some of these albums from Japan, these things that I've been looking for years, just see how that turns out. The shop that I went through, they didn't have Akira Ishikawa, but they had a few others. So I went ahead and got them and just discovered that these were just amazing albums. And I convinced my wife to let me go ahead and place another order. So I went through one of the proxy companies, placed this big order, got a lot of stuff via auctions and whatnot. I managed to get Akira Ishikawa and a bunch of others. Well, suddenly I've got, about a dozen or so Japanese albums.
Mm-hmm.
I was starting to record them and really enjoy them. And that's when COVID hits.
Hmm.
So, so, so I've got
Yes.
this new hobby. I've got all this time in the world, and insomnia had set in again.
Oh.
So it's just kind of a confluence of all this stuff. And I was like, well, why don't I go ahead and I'd been listening to Christmas Past and Can't Wait for Christmas for quite a while. I was like, why don't I go ahead and try to do a podcast? So it just happened that, it was a number of things fell into place, and that's how it came about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably about the same story as half of us on the Christmas podcast community right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see something really positive coming out of the COVID time. So that's good. I love jazz music, and I think Christmas jazz is some of my favorite. So I really enjoy your podcast. And, if listeners, if you haven't listened to his yet, I recommend it. It's a very relaxing experience. So I'm all about that. So I'm glad I finally could get you on here, and we can talk about one of our favorite movies. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and dive into this, and it's a film that I think we're all familiar with for the most part. I mean, it's a Christmas Carol. It doesn't really take too many diversions from the story, but where it does, I really like the direction they take it. Rather than doing kind of a scene by scene recap of the movie, I just wanted to pick out a couple of things to talk about it. But I guess first of all, have you, Scott, have you read the story before?
Several times.
Okay.
You used to be when my girls were younger. Every year around Christmas, I would read a Christmas Carol to them. I'd start like 4 weeks earlier, and about once a week we'd go through one part of it. So that was a tradition we had then. We also each year would do a Scrooge-a-thon, where get up early, start at like 6 or 7 in the morning, and start watching as many different versions of A Christmas Carol as we could usually in chronological order. So
Mm-hmm.
we'd start with like Silent Ones and finally make our way through to like Scrooged and stuff like that. I'd make a Christmas pudding. We had Goose one year, so it was a lot of fun.
Oh man, that sounds like fun. They do the 24-hour movie athons of like the Christmas Story or A Christmas Story and films like that. I think this is a better idea. Just 24 hours of different Christmas Carol versions. I like it.
Yeah, well, because you'd get something different like the
Yeah.
entire day, and
Right.
because except for a couple of them, they've all got something really good
Hmm.
uh, at some point in the movie. There's a couple that I won't say that about, but
Yeah. Now I'm tempted to ask because this film's come up a lot. What do you think about the animated? It's the one with Jim Carrey in it that came out a few years ago.
I
Is that one you
I
don't want to talk about, or?
I I think I got through about 5 minutes of it,
uh
and that was enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my problem wasn't his portrayal of Scrooge. I actually kind of enjoyed it. It was more of I think they really wanted it to be 3D, and the story part kind of suffered for that.
Hmm.
But anyway, I've seen it once, and then I've heard recently a couple people tell me they really enjoyed that version. So I'm thinking of maybe revisiting it, but I don't know. I might just let it be. But anyway, well, we're here to talk about a much better version. So this film came out in 1951. It was directed by Brian Desmond Hurst, and I'm not really familiar with a lot of old filmmakers, and so his name sounded familiar, but I don't know if I really have seen much that he's directed. And then the writer is Noel Langley, who has an appropriate name, I guess, to writing A Christmas Carol. But I did find out just today, I was looking him up online, and apparently he was one of the writers of the Wizard of Oz film that came out, in the 1930s. So he's got some credentials there. What's your history with this film? When did you first remember seeing it, and when did it become a favorite?
Well, growing up in the 70s and 80s, there were several films that they would play over and over again each year.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone remembers It's a Wonderful Life being just played dozens, if not hundreds of times between Thanksgiving and Christmas back then. But there were several different versions of A Christmas Carol that they would do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this one and the 1938 one with Reginald Owen, those were the two that tended to get played the most often. And the Alastair Sim version is the one that I remember being on the most. And funny thing is that my mom would come through the room and she'd see it was on. And she'd say, "Oh, kids, sit down and watch it. This is the best version of A Christmas Carol ever made." And she'd go about making cookies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until a few years ago that we were talking about it. And I told her, we're going home to watch the Alastair Sim version. And she goes, "Yeah, that's okay." I'm like, "What do you mean that's okay?" I go, "You always said it was the best version." She goes, "Oh, no, I meant," she goes, I always liked the original Owen version.
Oh, oh no.
So apparently when we were kids and she'd come through and see that A Christmas Carol was on and it was black and white, she just assumed it was Reginald Owen
Mm.
and say that was her favorite. So, but this is the one that, I'd catch it on the late movie around Christmas,
Mm.
Saturday afternoons. And I just fell in love with Alastair Sim's portrayal. I think of all the actors who have played Scrooge over the years, he just he just nails it as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
The versions where Scrooge is completely evil at the start, they're not as believable, they're not as compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And Alastair Sim's Scrooge seems just more of I guess, like a broken character.
Yeah.
He's not evil, he's just misguided. And he seems to portray that better than anyone else, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. his portrayal is just, I mean, he's kind of who I think about now when I think of Scrooge.
Hmm.
And I've got some quotes I'll share later that kind of help explain that why. But yeah, I remember watching this at my grandma and grandpa's house. You know, we'd go down to St. Louis and visit them over Christmas just about every year. And this is one of my dad's favorite versions. And so I remember watching this. I think my first Christmas Carol was the Mickey's Christmas Carol. So I was kind of familiar with the story. Shortly before or after that, I remember I have this clear memory of just sitting on the couch between my dad and my grandpa watching this film and just being so engrossed in it and caught up in it, especially the scene with him and Marley's ghost and how frightening that was. And then at the end of the film with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come and, just how scary that one was, it just frightened me. I have such a strong memory of that. Christmas at my grandparents' house was always just a special treat. Listeners of my podcast will know I talk about that off and on. I acknowledge that probably some of why I like this film might have to do with some nostalgia and all that, but that's okay. Nostalgia. We could have had Jerry on to talk about the power of nostalgia, I guess, but but it's it's a film like I was telling you. I was watching a couple of scenes today just to get some quotes down, and man, it just makes me feel like it's Christmas time whenever it comes on.
Hmm.
For me, I think that might just make it one of the best Christmas films that I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, and when we'd have our Scrooge-a-thons, this was just about, this was one of the few ones that we would actually watch out of order. So, throughout the day, we'd be watching everything in the right order. But this is the one we would generally save for, after dinner, everyone's winding down. And this would pretty much be the kind of the centerpiece of the little movie marathon.
Now, did you ever get tired of watching basically the same film over and over again, or?
Not really.
Okay.
Just because they're all so different from one another. I mean, it's the same story. There's a lot of similarities in the portrayals, but there's a huge difference between watching, the earliest ones like the silent ones, and then there's the Seymour Hicks version from 1935. Well, he also portrayed Scrooge back in, like, I think 1922. So you see differences like just in his performances. And then you get into the other variations like Mr. Magoo, Scrooged, and Mr. Magoo. That's always been my second favorite.
Okay. Yeah.
But you've got musical versions. So as the day went on, you're seeing something different every time you start one of the movies.
Yeah, cool. I might have to try that someday. That really sounds fun. One of the thing I wanted to bring out about the film is the very opening shot where you have the shelf of all the Dickens books, and the hand reaches up and pulls down A Christmas Carol. So I had to pause that scene today just so I could get the list of all the books that were shown, and there were 6 books listed there, and 5 of them are probably my favorite of Dickens's books. So I thought, oh, interesting. That's awesome. The one that one of them was Oliver Twist, and I don't like that one as much, although that's a more popular one of his books. It's a little misleading too, because Christmas Carol is not that thick, You see the size of the book, but anyway.
Oliver Twist, I have never made it through that book. I love Oliver, but I cannot get through the novel. I think I've tried reading it 4 or 5 times, and I get about 20, 30, 40 pages in and decide to move on.
Yeah. It's got its problems, and one character especially is just a really unfortunate Jewish stereotype, and that's hard to read, to be honest. Yeah, it doesn't rank one of my favorites, but the other ones mentioned is Pickwick Papers, David Copperfield, Great Expectations, and A Tale of Two Cities, and those are my favorite. Those are like my top five right there,
Hmm.
along with Christmas Carol. So the film's off to a good start with how it opens, but I and I've always loved that way of starting a film. Like to do that with fairy tales sometime, where it's like they open the book and then the camera goes into the book or something. And
Uh-huh.
I don't know. As a book lover, I kind of always liked that.
Yeah, well, and you used to see that a lot more several decades ago. It's
Hmm.
something and that's one of the fun things about watching some of these older movies is seeing the various styles and tropes and whatnot that were
Hmm.
so common back then that you don't see in movies anymore. Like somebody gets a letter in the mail and you get the 30-second shot of the letter as opposed to somebody reading something and then you just have to infer from the dialogue what
Hmm.
was in it.
The movie itself follows pretty closely to the book, like I mentioned. A couple of things I guess I want to point out is first of all and we've kind of talked a bit about Alastair Sim already in his portrayal of Scrooge, but I was just struck again by how just how sad he looks. Like you were saying, like he's just a broken man,
Hmm.
and he portrays that. It's part of it's the style of the 1950s acting choices and stuff, which to be honest, I'm not a big fan of. It certainly wouldn't be out of place on like a stage performance or something. And so I try to look at it from that perspective. But I caught several scenes where when he's weeping, he doesn't just cry. He like bends over and buries his face in his hands, and like his shoulders shake and things. And I just thought that was very moving for me to watch that, to see that, and how much of his whole body he's just putting into the performance.
Yeah, well, and at the end, when it's Christmas Day and the housekeeper comes in and he acts crazy
Hmm.
at first, and when he finally stops and is convincing her that he's not crazy, just there's just one shot of his face where the look of regret that comes through,
Hmm.
it's just fantastic. I mean, it turns it into such a believable performance. And I mean, there's a lot of moments that I love in the movie, but that's one of them that every time I watch it, it just really stands out for me.
Yeah, that scene with him and Mrs. Dilber on the stairs, where he's just gone from like manic crazy happiness to something very tender,
Hmm.
and he raises her salary to 10 shillings a week instead of two, and all that, and wishes her just earnestly wishes her a Merry Christmas. Maybe I'm an old softy, but I like to see I like to see men behaving in ways that's gentle, and kind, and I always find that very very moving, and that
Hmm.
scene really strikes me. And then really his the scene with him and Marley's ghost, I think is pretty classic, iconic even. I kind of like this movie's Marley. I feel like he really goes a little over the top with the whole theatrical wailing and stuff, but I don't know how much of that is just the style of acting from the 50s. Sometimes it's like, okay, tone it down a little bit, guy. You're going a little too much.
Well, and if nothing else, it's mild compared to Alec Guinness in Scrooge.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a movie that had to grow on me. But even now, when I watch it, I have a hard time with Alec Guinness in it.
Aren't you Obi-Wan Kenobi? No.
Yeah, of all the Marleys, you'd think Alec Guinness would be, right up there, but he just
Mm.
his overacting.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, interestingly, Alastair Sim played Scrooge again in a animated short that came out in the 70s, I believe.
Hmm.
And it won, if I remember right, it won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the neat thing about that one is that, at least at the time and for quite a few years after that, it's the only one where when Marley's ghost undid the bandage around his head, that his jaw just completely dropped like
Mm-hmm.
like they describe it in the book.
Yeah, and there are a couple scenes in this movie that I realized I don't know if these are scenes you see as commonly in some of the modern day versions. I know sometimes they'll cut out the scene of ignorance and want,
Hmm.
which I think you really miss the whole point of Dickens's novel when you do that. That's kind of his main thrust.
Hmm.
But it was that one, and then the scene where Marley, opens the window and or goes to the window and shows him all the ghosts around this poor woman who's out on the street, and the ghosts are just surrounding her and lamenting and all that. And we don't usually see that scene either. I don't think. I can't really think of any film that had it, but I haven't seen them all yet. It's on my to-do list.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of another one that did that. So,
Yeah. I think not only does it add to the spookiness of the story, I think it helps add to the message that Dickens wants to tell
hmm.
of helping people before it's too late. This quote, when Scrooge meets the ghost of Christmas Present, I love he's a little sarcastic too in this movie, which I kind of like that, but because the book kind of implies that he's clever and smart, and I've always kind of thought maybe he's a little sarcastic too. But so the ghost of Christmas Present says, "Come in and know me better, and you've never seen the likes of me before." And Scrooge says, "And I wish the pleasure had been indefinitely postponed." And I love
Uh-huh.
that. Not in the book, but that's an addition I like. And so then he asks him, "So is your heart still unmoved?" And this is a quote that really just almost sometimes just kind of is haunting, but he says, "I am too old. I am beyond hope. Go and redeem some younger, more promising creature and leave me to keep Christmas in my own way." It's just a powerful moment. And then the spirit kind of chides him for, not, that we are to keep Christmas in our heart every day of the year, because the child of Bethlehem is in our hearts every day of the year. So we should celebrate it every day of the year. And I kind of like that message, but, just the thought that he thinks he's too old. And then he'll say that again with the ghost of, I think it's the ghost of Christmas future or yet to come. He tells him, he says, "Spirit, I must tell you, I fear you more than any other specter I've seen. But even in my fear, I must tell you, I am too old. I cannot change. It's not that I'm impenitent. Wouldn't it be better if I just went home to bed?" That he's just at the point of giving up. He thinks he's too old, that he can't still make a difference,
Hmm.
which, these are lines that aren't in the book, but I think they are so powerful as a part of his character. And going back to what you were saying, that, he's this broken man. It's not that he's mean or evil. It's just that he's broken. He thinks it's too late, even though he's being faced with his faults, and he's like, "It's too late for me. Go spend your time with somebody else who can make a difference. I'm just going to go home and go to bed."
Well, yeah, and I like the way that it helps get across the message that it's not too late. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anybody can change, anybody can make improvements. So it adds to the overall message that you get from the story.
Mm-hmm. And then another character I really like in this film is Bob Cratchit, and Mervyn Johns plays Bob Cratchit. Another actor, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else that he's done, but I like his portrayal of Bob Cratchit quite a bit. He's kind, he's gentle, he's very much the opposite of Scrooge.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, Scrooge is kind of loud and bombastic and gruff, and Bob's almost his exact opposite.
Yeah, well, and one thing that this is something I didn't realize until the last time I watched it. I can't think of anything else I've watched Mervyn John in, but in in A Christmas Carol, Hermione Baddeley plays his wife,
Mm-hmm.
and then what uh, 15, 18 years later, uh, she would play the housekeeper in Mary Poppins
Mm-hmm.
to Glynis Johns as the mother, and Glynis Johns was Mervyn's daughter.
Okay.
So it's
Oh, interesting.
it's just kind of a neat connection there.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's neat. Yeah, it took me a long time before I realized that Mrs. Cratchit and the housekeeper were the same actress. As a kid, you don't really pay attention to that. At least I didn't.
Hmm.
But after a while as an adult, I'm like, boy, she looks so familiar. Who is that? And then one day we were watching Mary Poppins, and I'm like, oh, that okay, got it finally. Oh, it's been bugging me. Kids, that was back before the days of the internet where I could have just Googled it and found out right away. Now, do you have any other character or actor in this film that really stick out to you?
I do like young Scrooge.
Hmm.
George Cole portrays him, and I've always liked his portrayal of the young Scrooge. And I didn't realize until a couple years ago we were watching another Alastair Sim movie, and which one escapes me right now. But George Cole was in that one also,
Mm.
and it was streaming on Amazon, so it had the X-ray pop-ups, and
Hmm.
it turns out that I guess Alastair Sim had become like a real mentor to George Cole. At one point, I believe he even lived with Alastair Sim because he was just looking out for him
Mm.
and shepherding him in the earlier stages of his career. So it's kind of neat that old
Yeah.
Scrooge and young Scrooge ended up having such a close relationship in real life.
Oh wow! Now that makes me happy. I'm glad to hear that. Because you always wonder. I don't know that who hated working with who and all that. And that's neat. I like that. Are there any favorite scenes that you think this movie does a really outstanding job in compared to others?
The entire end sequence, just
Hmm.
because of just because of how well Alastair Sim, just his transformation, I think is probably the best of all the Scrooges. He seems to have genuine. I mean, he makes it appear as though he genuinely went from, being this mean, uh, unsympathetic character to at the end having actually redeemed himself. And I mean, you watch it and you believe that character is really going to carry on with what he's committed to.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I mean, from the time he wakes up Christmas morning to the end of the movie, I just of all the different versions, I think this one does the best job with it.
Yeah, I realized like through the whole end of that whole scene, I just have a big grin on my face because it's it's so fun. I love how happy he is. It is literally like a burden's been lifted off of him, and he's been given a new zest for life.
Hmm. Well, and for me, that portion of the movie is, I mean, it's right up there with the end of It's a Wonderful Life for me. I mean,
Hmm.
It's a Wonderful Life, I think, beats it out a little. But
Yeah.
as far as, classic Christmas movies, the endings of both of those, they move me every time I watch them.
Yeah, I like that he's looking in the mirror and he's rubbing his hair and calls himself an old humbug, and whoever is playing Mrs. Dilber there, she is just so good that she thinks he has just gone crazy. And then the part where he's trying to stand on his head and his nightgown starts going up and she covers her face and screams and runs out and that thinks he's paying her hush money. And oh, it's great.
Hmm.
Yeah, but then like I had mentioned, there's just this really lovely scene of the two of them on the stairs, and these are some of the changes, or at least expansions from the book that I really enjoy, because I think it's a good understanding of the character, and it kind of fleshes it out a little bit more, where you see him being kind not just to Bob Cratchit but to everyone now
Hmm.
he's in his life. And then right at the very end scene, really, with between him and Bob Cratchit, that when he comes into to work and and he tells him to step forward, and then you think he's going to get fired, and he said, so I have no choice but to raise your salary. And, Bob just stares at him, and then Scrooge just starts laughing uncontrollably. And then, the look on his face as he, calms down from laughing, and he manages to convey both happiness and I think a touch of sorrow. He's realizing I did not treat you well, and I want to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a wonderful performance right there, and just a quick look on his face.
Well, and is this the one where he says he doesn't deserve to be this happy?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite quotes there too. Is that he says, "I don't deserve to be this happy," and then he kind of throws his pen in the air like, "Oh well," but I can't help it. Checks his pen up. Well, are there any other quotes or scenes that you wanted to bring up or talk about?
I can't think of any that stand out in a positive way off the top of my head. One thing, every time I watch it, the one thing that I have a little difficulty getting past is not so tiny Tim. And I've even read that a lot of the cast and crew were disappointed with the fact that the actor they chose for Tiny Tim was as big as Bob Cratchit. So
that's funny.
I mean, he does a good job, but I believe he's the biggest Tiny Tim ever put to film.
I was just noticing today, right at the end scene when he comes running up to Scrooge and they walk off together. It's really sweet, but then I realized he was kind of shaking his leg to show Scrooge that he was better, but I'm like, wow, his legs are really lanky.
Mm-hmm.
He must have been cast and then got a growing spurt or something. I feel like his scene at the Cratchit's table, when he says "God bless us, everyone," it's a little too much for me, just a little too sweet. It's the glowing light on him, the music playing, and the camera filter being all fuzzy, and I'm like, okay, we get it. That one's a little rough, but
yeah. Well, and I think a lot of them have kind of the I can't think of a really great Tiny Tim.
Yeah.
They're all kind of maudlin and a bit over the top, but
yeah, that might be Dickens' fault. I don't know. Well, actually, this is maybe unfair, but I think one of the best Tiny Tim performances I've seen was in Omaha. I live about 40 minutes from Omaha, and they have a Christmas Carol musical every year. I've been able to see that a couple of times, and both times they've picked an actor who's done a pretty decent job with Tiny Tim. And in fact, one of the performances I saw, it was actually a girl playing Tiny Tim. So that I don't know. I don't find that scandalous at all when they're on stage. You can't tell. But I thought they did a really good job with that. But not anybody probably has seen it. I guess that kind of wraps up my thoughts on the film. I was just in the mood for some Christmas comfort, I guess, and then I had this idea I'm going to talk about this movie on the podcast. So, Scott, I appreciate you jumping on here to talk about it with me.
I'm glad you had me on. We have so little time to watch movies anymore that this was actually the first time I'd watched it in 2 or 3 years. So I was definitely glad to put it on again and sit down and spend a little time with it.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in at least a couple years myself. It's, as much as I love it, I don't watch it every year. So it's kind of like I rotate between which version I'll watch this year and that kind of thing. This year I had wanted to watch it, but I just didn't have the time. And then it got to be, the end of January, and I thought, well, I better watch it. It's February. That's all right. I don't care. Well, before you go, I wanted to, since you're a first-time guest on the podcast, I just wanted to ask you a couple of Christmassy questions here so we can determine if you're a good guest or not. So, so answer carefully here. No, but I like to ask also things like, do you have a favorite Christmas food that you like to eat?
My mom's candy cane cookies.
Mm.
Um, they're they're not peppermint flavored at all. It's almond flavored, but she's been making them since we were well, before I can even remember.
Mm-hmm.
And they're such a big thing in my family that she'll make an extra batch at Christmas time and freeze it until July, so we all get Christmas cane cookies for July also.
Mm.
So that it's not Christmas unless we've had my mom's candy cane cookies.
Mm-hmm. Now, so they're not peppermint. Why are they called candy cane cookies? Are they shaped like candy
Yeah.
canes? Or oh, okay.
So you half the dough is white, the other half is reddish, and you just
Mm-hmm.
twist them together into candy canes and bake them.
Okay. Yeah, those sound good. I like candy canes, but in a cookie, like peppermint in a cookie, that's a taste that doesn't always appeal to me. So, but that sounds good
Hmm.
with the almonds and uh, lack of peppermint, I guess.
Yeah, well, because at one point
Uh,
my wife found a recipe for candy cane cookies that used peppermint, and
mm-hmm.
you were supposed to even grind up candy canes and sprinkle them over top. And she baked them, and we all tried them and said, These aren't candy cane cookies." She's like, "What do you mean? They're peppermint." We're
I
like,
mean, you can't get more
we're
candy
like,
cane than
"Yeah,
that.
these aren't candy cane cookies." And so,
That's great. I love a good Christmas cookie. I was gonna say there's not really a whole lot I don't like when it comes to cookies, but anything with chocolate, that's a winner for me. So, how about do you have a favorite Christmas song?
um, my default answer is "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year" by Andy
Mm,
Williams. Um, and a lot of that goes back to the old Staples commercial where it's
yeah.
back to school shopping.
Oh yeah,
um
yeah.
but for me to pick a favorite, a single favorite, it's just impossible. Um I have a kind of extensive Christmas music collection, um
Mm,
and it, a lot of it is based on my mood.
mm-hmm,
um it, it, I guess a better answer would be the entire John Denver and the Muppets A Christmas Together album.
mm-hmm,
Um, that it came out in 1979. Uh, we saw that the special was coming out. My mom ran out, grabbed the album or bought the album, and it suddenly became just about the only album we listened to each year.
mm,
We had two Firestone compilations that would play along with it. But as soon as we got John Denver and the Muppets, it's half of other Christmas albums just kind of started collecting dust. Um, and my mom was the sort who she played Christmas music year round,
mm-hmm.
so we never got a break from it. Um, and from 1979 onwards, it was John Denver and the Muppets more than anything else. So
Mm.
kind of explains my collecting years later.
Yeah, it kind of does.
But
Yeah. No,
but yeah, when it gets
mm,
and with the podcast and everything else, I mean, I'm listening to Christmas music pretty much every day.
mm-hmm,
But when it gets to be, actual Christmas music season, the first album I'll listen to all the way through is John Denver and the Muppets.
mm-hmm. Now, when is that for you? When is it officially Christmas music season?
Usually, I'll usually about October 1st.
Mm,
That's when I'll start playing it on Sirius throughout the house, and
mm-hmm.
um, the kids keep telling me, "No, you can't do it until November."
Yeah, that's somewhere between like mid September to about October 1st. I always, at least on the day that's 100 days until Christmas, I usually spend all day listening to Christmas music, just kind of as that kickoff for the last 100 days. But um, yeah, definitely about October, I'm feeling the need to listen to Christmas music.
Hmm.
And I'll listen to it throughout the year off and on, but I do take a break a little bit. Um, Not that I get tired of it. It's just I like to keep it fresh. So, but
Well,
oh,
and
go ahead.
that I was going to say that that's a good thing with with my podcast
Mm-hmm.
with all these different albums that I get from Japan is that it's all stuff I've never heard
Mm-hmm.
before. So that helps keep it fresh. I mean, if there wasn't as big of a variety as what there is, I don't know that I'd have been able to keep this up for 3 years. But
Yeah.
the fact that there's just there's so many different artists and they've got so many different songs that you know since Christmas over there is more of a secular holiday,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the more contemporary Japanese Christmas songs are pretty much just pop songs that happen to involve Christmas or Christmas related things. So it makes it a lot easier to get through the entire year listening to it on a daily basis.
How about any favorite Christmas memories or traditions that mean a lot to you?
One of our favorite traditions that we have now is our Christmas Eve pajamas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when when the older girls were really little, I forget where I heard it. Somebody mentioned opening pajamas every Christmas Eve,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, hey, that'd be a lot of fun. And ever since then, every Christmas Eve, I tell the kids, hey, y'all get to open one gift tonight, and then you have to save everything else for tomorrow. And it just so happens that every year that one gift is pajamas. We try to get it so that every year there's matching pajamas for everyone, including the dog. So,
Nice. I love that.
well, and it was funny when the kids were little. Um, they would get so upset when I'd say, "All right, everyone gets to open a present," and they'd open it, and what do you know? It's pajamas. And so when they were real little, they didn't like it, but as they got older, it grew on them, and
Yeah.
now they all look forward to opening those Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I think my kids have kind of flipped. They were excited about it, and now I, at least my boys, I don't know if they really care. But one of the first years we did that with, because we would do that same with pajamas on Christmas Eve. I was taking my oldest; he was pretty young. I think he was probably 4, and I was like, okay, let's go shop for mom. And we got her some polar bear pajamas, and real fuzzy Christmassy polar bear pajamas, and I was telling him like through the whole store, through the whole time, okay, don't tell mom what we got her. Don't tell mom. Okay, okay, I won't. Okay, okay. Well, it's a secret. Okay. And we met back up with her, and the first thing out of his mouth, "We got you polar bear jammies, mommy." I'm like, Ryan, come on. Oh, but I guess I should have seen that one coming. He was just so excited he couldn't keep it to himself. So,
Well, and because I've got 4 girls,
uh-huh.
and I think part of why it's grown on them so much is that you know being able to slip into those brand new cozy pajamas on Christmas Eve that it, it just adds something
Mm-hmm.
to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Grace will like Christmas pajamas between now and the end of time. So,
Hmm.
yep, I get that. Well, Scott, thanks for jumping on tonight and talking Christmas with me. And where can folks find you and your podcast?
I'm hosted on Libsyn. I can't think of the full URL off the top of my head, but I'm on most of the major streaming platforms. Just do a search on Holly Jolly Xmasu and I should come up. I'm not on Spotify, and I think that's due to just music
Hmm,
issues.
sure.
But otherwise, you can find me everywhere else.
All right. And again, I recommend you check him out. Check out his podcast. It's it'll bring a whole new realm of Christmas music your way. So, all right. Well, Scott, thanks again for coming on. You take care.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're able to. It really helps get the word out about this podcast. If you'd like to help us out in a financial way, there are links in the show notes for that. You can leave me a donation at Ko-fi.com, and if you send me your address, I'll send you a bookmark and a sticker and a Christmas card as my way of saying thank you for your support. Well, hopefully the busy post-Christmas season is behind us, and we can start running headlong into the new year, although it's already a third of the way over, and heading into some great new Christmas traditions and memories and things that are still before us. And so until next time, remember to be kind and let us honor Christmas in our heart and try to keep it all the year. Have a very Merry Christmas.